Billionaire lose everything because he couldn't handle one invisible worker with a flashlight and a calculus book? Stay with me, because what he thought was disrespect was actually the trigger for the most surgical takedown his entire empire never saw coming. What the hell are you doing here? Richard Sterling's voice cracked through the silence of his penthouse at exactly 3:00 a.m., sharp enough to bounce off marble and glass and return twice as cold. The $30 million apartment sat above the sleeping city like a private kingdom, spotless, quiet, untouchable. Or at least it had been, until Richard stepped out in silk pajamas and found his cleaner sitting on the floor in the dark, with books spread across the marble like blueprints on a drafting table. Kesha Williams, 26, black, hair pulled back tight from a long shift, didn't flinch. A small flashlight in her hand cast a focused beam across pages of advanced calculus, the kind of math most people avoid because it doesn't care about excuses. Beside her were neatly arranged cleaning supplies, folded rags, a bucket rinsed out, and stacked proof that the work he paid her for was finished. She was studying not because she was sloppy, but because she was disciplined. "Mr. Sterling," she replied, voice controlled, almost too calm for the moment. "I'm done cleaning. I was just taking a few minutes to study before I head home." Richard descended the curved staircase like a man coming down to correct a mistake in his environment. At 42, he'd built a real estate empire by being ruthless and by believing in one unspoken rule: everyone has a place, and the people at the bottom should never forget it. A cleaner studying in his home didn't fit his design. It violated his sense of order. "Study?" he scoffed, the word coming out like it tasted wrong. "Do you have any idea where you are? This isn't a public library. This is my home. I pay you to clean, not to play student." Keisha closed the book slowly, not apologizing. She slid a cheap $5 calculator into her bag, the kind you buy at a convenience store when you're building a future one small tool at a time. Something about the way she moved, unhurried, unafraid, pulled at something uneasy inside Richard. The rich are used to obedience. They're used to seeing fear. Calm from someone they see as powerless feels like a threat they can't identify. "With all due respect, sir," she said evenly, "the house is spotless, just like I always leave it." That should have ended it.
But it didn't.
Because for 6 months, Kesha had been invisible to him in the way domestic workers are invisible to people who've trained themselves not to see human beings, only services. She came in, cleaned, disappeared. He never learned her story, never wondered what her mind was doing while her hands worked. And now seeing her there with calculus proof she was reaching beyond the role he assigned her hit him like an insult to the hierarchy he lived on. He stepped closer, using height and wealth the way some people use volume. "Listen carefully," he said, voice low, threatening. "People like you have a place in society. Don't pretend to be something you're not. It's pathetic." Kesha looked up then, and for the first time Richard truly saw her eyes. Not angry, not pleading.
Certain.
The kind of certainty that makes a powerful man take a half step back without understanding why. It was the quiet confidence of someone who knows the truth, knows the process, and knows the outcome even if nobody else in the room has run the numbers yet. "People like me," she repeated slowly, as if she wanted him to hear each word in full. Interesting perspective, Mr. Sterling. Richard felt a flash of irritation, then a flicker of something else. Discomfort. Because without realizing it, he'd just challenged the one kind of person most dangerous to an arrogant man, someone underestimated who is collecting data. "You're fired," he snapped. "Control. Pack your things and leave. And don't even think about asking for references." Kesha stood, gathered her books, and moved toward the door with dignity that didn't beg for approval. At the threshold, she turned back. "Mr. Sterling," she said softly, and the words hung in the air like a warning label no one reads until after the failure. "Have you ever heard the saying about not underestimating the people who are always watching?" Then she left, carrying not just textbooks, but 6 months of observations about the man who just made the biggest mistake of his life. Richard stared at the empty doorway, annoyed, but not satisfied. Something about her calmness scratched at his ego like grit in a bearing. He tried to dismiss it. "Ridiculous," he muttered the next morning, tying a $1,000 Italian tie. "A cleaning lady trying to intimidate me." But that irritation spiked when his assistant Janet entered with a cautious expression. "Mr. Sterling," the cleaning company called. "They're asking why you fired Kesha Williams. They said she was the highest-rated employee they've ever had. Richard waved it off like it was nothing. She didn't know her place. I found her studying in my home, Janet hesitated. Studying what? Sir Richard slammed his hand on the desk. It doesn't matter if it was calculus or a comic boo. Domestic employees do not study in their employer's home. Period. He thought that was the end of it. He thought he'd reset the system. What Richard didn't know was that while he was raging in a glass office, Kesha was sitting at a public library table under fluorescent lights doing something far more dangerous than crying. She was organizing evidence. For 6 months inside that penthouse, Kesha had run a routine no one noticed, because people like Richard don't track the activities of the help. She arrived early. 40 minutes early, not out of eagerness to impress, but because she'd noticed Richard's habit. After late meetings, he left documents scattered like confetti. Land purchases that would skyrocket in value after zoning changes. Changes he somehow always knew about in advance. Consulting fee invoices that looked clean on paper but felt dirty when you followed the timing and the amounts. Emails coordinating public auction bids with other developers so they could manipulate prices and eliminate competitors. Texts that read like casual business but were really instructions on how to make a city bend. Kesha didn't just see it. She photographed it quietly with an old phone no one would ever suspect could capture the fine print. Then she cataloged everything: dates, parties, amounts, context, like a disciplined analyst building a case file. Because Kesha wasn't just a cleaner. She was an economics graduate from State University, summa cum laude, who had worked 3 jobs while studying because talent doesn't pay rent unless you force it to. Her diploma wasn't hanging in a fancy frame. It was tucked into a drawer in the small home she shared with her mother, Barbara, and 2 younger sisters, Jennifer and Tracy. For 2 years after graduation, she had sent resumes to major firms across the city. She got 3 replies, 3 polite rejections, not a culture fit, position filled. We're moving forward with other candidates. The message underneath was the one nobody wrote down. You don't look like the kind of person we invest in. That's when Kesha changed strategy. If the front door was locked, she would enter through the back literally. She studied hiring pattern service schedules, which cleaning companies serviced which properties, who rotated staff. When she found out Richard Sterling needed a new cleaner, she applied the same day the supervisor asked for references. Kesha smiled and said, I have something better. I work hard. For 6 months, she stayed invisible by design. Clean, leave, collect. Store, repeat. And here's the part that would make any serious planner nod. The calculus scene wasn't carelessness. It was bait. Chart. Thursdays he returned early from a private dinner at the club. Fridays he was out late. She picked 1 a.m. because she knew he'd walk in at the exact time her flashlight would provoke his ego. She needed an excuse to be fired cleanly, without suspicion, so she could exit with her evidence intact and without anyone thinking to question why the cleaner suddenly vanished. Being fired wasn't a loss. It was the final step in the plan. At the library, Kesha opened a used laptop she'd bought with savings and began building a dossier so complete it didn't just accuse Richard Sterling, it mapped his entire machine. Not rumors, not guesses. A system diagram of corruption. Who paid whom, which permits were fast-tracked, which contracts were manipulated, which public projects were siphoned, how the money moved and where it landed. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jennifer, 16. Kesh, did you get another job? Mom's worried about bills. Kesha looked at the screen, then at her organized files. Her family had sacrificed everything so she could reach this point. Barbara worked double shifts as a nurse. Jennifer and Tracy pulled part-time hours to help keep food on the table. They deserved more than survival. They deserved dignity. Tell Mom not to worry, Kesha typed back. Soon, everything changes. Meanwhile, Richard Sterling was telling the story at his exclusive club like it was comedy. He raised a $300 whiskey and laughed with other men in expensive watches. You won't believe it. I caught my cleaner studying calculus in my living room. They chuckled like it was absurd. But in the background, refilling glasses and carrying trays, a young man listened. Marcus Thompson, an investigative journalist working part-time at the club, to pay bills while he chased the kind of stories powerful people try to bury. Marcus had been investigating Sterling for 2 years. He'd heard whispers, smelled smoke, but never got close enough to grab fire. He found Kesha at the library. He approached carefully, respectful. Sorry to bother you. I'm Marcus Thompson. I'm a journalist. I heard you used to work for Richard Sterling. Kesha looked up, studying him the way she studied everything. Quietly, accurately. I did. Why? Marcus lowered his voice. Because I've been digging into him for 2 years, and I can't get solid evidence. Someone inside his home for months could change everything. Kesha didn't smile big. She didn't celebrate. She simply opened her notebook the way a professional opens a case file. Marcus's eyes widened as he saw the organization contracts, payment trails, screenshots, dates, notes, names, meticulous, verifiable. My God, he whispered, this isn't just Sterling. This is half the city's power structure. I'm not done, Kesha said calmly. I have 3 more sources confirming the bid rigging at City Hall. Over the next weeks, Marcus and Kesha built the kind of package you can't spin away. Every document verified, every transaction traced, every claim backed by evidence. Sterling made it even easier when he hosted investors in the penthouse and, captured by his own security camera, offered bribes in exchange for inside information tied to a public housing project. The irony was brutal. The same man who mocked a woman studying was recorded stealing from the people she came from. Marcus showed Kesha the footage. This is it. We publish Monday. Front page, site, social, everything at once. No quiet backroom settlement. No burying it. That night, Kesha came home and found her mother waiting in the living room, eyes tired but alert. You've been different, Barbara said gently. Calmer. More determined. What are you planning? Kesha hugged her, breathing in the familiar scent of hospital disinfectant that always clung to Barbara after a shift. Mom, remember when you said one day our situation would change? Barbara nodded slowly. I remember. That day is here, Kesha said. On Monday, the world will know who I really am. Her daughter's face, seeing the same iron focus that had carried Kesha through school when everything tried to pull her down. What did he do to you? He did what men like him always do, Kesha said. He underestimated me, and he left the door open. Monday at 6 a.m., Richard Sterling's phone started ringing like an alarm system in full failure. Janet, his lawyer, unknown numbers, journalists, all at once. He stumbled into the living room in pajamas, annoyed and confused until he saw the newspaper. His photo, his name, a headline so bold it felt physical. Millionaire empire built on bribes and fraud, exclusive documents expose corruption scheme. Richard's legs weakened. He grabbed the paper, eyes scanning, and the blood drained from his face with every paragraph. Evidence provided by an anonymous source with privileged access to the residence for months. Privileged access, he repeated, finally connecting the dots. His phone rang again. The bank. Federal auditors are here. Then a panicked political contact. You compromised me. I have to distance myself. Then investors. We want out. One by one, the network that made him powerful severed itself to survive. At 9 a.m., locked in his office, Richard watched TV anchors discuss his crimes like they were a done deal. Experts estimated prison time. Authorities announced investigations. His accounts were frozen. His empire was collapsing in real time. Then the doorbell rang. The intercom crackled. Mr. Sterling, came a familiar voice, calm as ever. This is Kesha Williams. I'm here to return something you left behind. Richard's mouth went dry. With shaking fingers, he buzzed her in. Minutes later, she stood in his office, not in a cleaning uniform, but in a simple blazer, carrying a leather briefcase that looked exactly like the ones his attorneys used. She placed the newspaper on his desk. I thought you might want an autographed copy, she said lightly. Richard stared at her, stunned by the standing with the posture of someone in control. It was you, he whispered. You did this. For 6 months, Kesha said evenly. You left documents lying around because you assumed a cleaning lady couldn't understand them. You were wrong. She let the silence do its work, then delivered the point that hit hardest. Economics degree, summa cum laude, a small smile. Not cruel.
Precise.
You fired me for studying calculus, not knowing I'd already graduated in the field that let me decode every scheme you ran. Richard sank into his chair, the arrogance finally draining out of him. Why? Because my family has lived under the weight of men like you, Kesha said, voice steady, not emotional, not begging. Because you believed your money made you untouchable, and because you made the fatal mistake of judging my intelligence by my skin color and my job title. His phone rang, his lawyer this time, voice urgent. Richard, the IRS is moving to seize assets. You need to surrender before they issue an arrest warrant. Kesha watched him absorb it, watched the moment the reality locked in. Then she stood, walking toward the door like someone exiting a chapter she'd already finished. One last thing, Mr. Sterling, she said. The cooperation reward was enough to make sure my mother can retire, my sisters can finish college, and I can finally work where I've earned the right to be. Richard looked up, desperate for control, for any explanation that made this feel less like a perfect collapse. You planned all of this from the beginning. Kesha paused in the doorway of the same penthouse where he'd tried to shrink her. I didn't plan your crimes, she said calmly. I prepared for the moment. Your arrogance gave me what I needed. 6 months later, Richard Sterling sat in a federal prison cell in an orange jumpsuit that mocked every tailored suit he ever wore. 15 years, racketeering, money laundering, active corruption, properties auction. Accounts seized, reputation erased. The man who once told someone else to know your place now lived in a world where he was treated the way he had treated others, dismissed, reduced, powerless. Meanwhile, Kesha walked into her first day as a senior analyst at a top consulting firm, working in a high-rise that overlooked the same city Richard once thought he owned. Her supervisor shook her hand. Congratulations, Kesha. Your compliance report saved us from stepping into a scheme like Sterling's. The professional win mattered, but what mattered more was seeing her family finally breathe. Barbara retired and tended a small garden behind their new home. Jennifer entered medical school. Tracy studied law, fueled by the lesson that justice isn't a slogan, it's a process you build with evidence and courage. When Jennifer brought home a paper showing Richard being transferred after a prison incident, Kesha looked once, then set it down. He brought that on himself, she said simply. I just documented it. And that's the real twist. The most powerful part of Kesha's story wasn't revenge. It was proof. Proof that competence doesn't need permission. Proof that strategy beats swagger. Proof that people labeled invisible can be the most dangerous witnesses in the room. So tell me, when Richard said people like you have a place, what do you think his real mistake was? The cruelty? Or the assumption? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that preparation changes outcomes. And subscribe for more stories where arrogance meets consequences and the underestimated rewrite the ending.